It's February 23rd, 2022, and we're talking to Phillip Aram, the Executive Director of the LCS Players Association. This is the True Sight Podcast. Welcome to the True Sight Podcast by Oracle's Elixir, your source for in-depth analytical coverage of professional League of Legends and the rest of the esports world. I'm Tim Magic Sevenhuisen, and my guest today is the Executive Director of the LCS Players Association, Phillip Aram. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tim. Glad to be here.
Now, the temptation, of course, is to say your last name like Aram, but I believe, and I didn't ask you ahead of time, but I believe I'm more on target.
You're pretty close, honestly. Like, I think my family pronounces my name incorrectly, so I think it's actually like the origins are more like biblical and like Middle Eastern, even though I'm very, very Germanic. But yeah, I think like we say it sort of like air, like the air you breathe, and like the filler word you use for conversation. So, but Aram is more than acceptable. I happily take whatever added credibility I get for having my name be the same as a game mode whenever I can.
It just makes you more legit. So I'm happy to have you on the show today to learn a little bit more about what's going on with the Players Association, what your role is in it. I think it's something that over several years people continue to bring up, like lots of different things around kind of player rights or salaries or transparency or lots of different things. And the Players Association came in to try to help to deal with some of those things. And a lot of the topics people continue to bring up or maybe even complain about are, hey, there's no unionization, so you can't do a lot of this stuff. But you bring in the Players Association, it tries to get at some of these things. And still, I think for the average fan, there's a lot of a bit of a lack of information about what you guys can actually do, what you have been doing. And so, I'm excited to kind of hear from you a little bit about what you guys have been working on and what the future looks like and some of that. But why don't we start out by just giving people a bit of a chance to get to know you a little bit better, and maybe just hear briefly about kind of your background in esports and what led you to taking on this role.
Yeah, my background goes way back. I started writing for a now defunct publication, ESFI World, when I was in college and just had a passion for esports. I actually got into esports. I had a friend who was the number one rated Warcraft 3 player in the US when I was a freshman, and like I was always a console gamer. It's a very boring story, but anyway, he introduced me to Warcraft 3 and the rest is sort of history. But I started out writing in college and graduated in the early years not early years of esports, but early years pre Twitch really taking off and monetization really taking off. So I went and spent several years working in politics and in tech startups after college, but maintained my connections to the space with all the people I had written with and about, and had an opportunity when I saw Twitch really taking off to make the jump back to esports. I had good connections with Good Game Agency, the owners of Evil Geniuses and Alliance, and got an opportunity to come on there and manage a team that became Mouse Sports, actually, back when Good Game was sort of licensing, sort of like packaging players and then licensing them out to other teams. That team fell off a cliff and did nothing, and I fell back to Evil Geniuses very thankfully at the Dota 2 team for their TI5 run, which they won, and I quickly became the sort of de facto negotiator for the players for their next contract following that win, and put together a strategy whereby we ended up negotiating for the owner of Evil Geniuses at the time, Twitch, to sell the team back to the players and myself. So I quickly went from being working in politics and then working in player management to now being a co-team owner of a legacy esports brand that had a lot of kind of warts and issues. It moved from owner to owner for quite a bit in the last couple of years, and it had a bunch of stuff come up, including around League of Legends with dual ownership and things like that. So the next 6 years was really just figuring out how to keep that brand alive, how to do right by the players who I had helped get ownership and equity in it to make sure that they got something out of it, and was able to successfully take the team and sell it to a majority stake to Peak Six, who are now the owners that brought it into LCS, and I was the lead person in driving our pitch to getting into the LCS, as well as getting back into Counter-Strike and really regrowing the brand. And after doing that for a year and a half, post the sale, I was just ready for a new adventure. Liberal politics and working with players and player advocacy has always been sort of the core of who I am. And so being able to get, I sort of become an owner by proxy of good negotiating, and wasn't really keen on that side of the aisle. So being able to find an opportunity to affect the ecosystem in a way and really support players was what I wanted to do. And this opportunity kind of came at a perfect time for me, and Darshan and I connected well, and the rest is sort of history.
Cool. Yeah. So there was like a job posting that they put out, right? And I assume there were multiple people applying to that. And maybe this gives a little bit of insight into what the LCSPA really is and how it works. Is the hiring process for that? You say like you connected with Darshan. Was this all players like reviewing your application and deciding who to hire and things, or did they have non-players involved in helping them with that?
Yeah, no, not at all. And I actually didn't even see the posting until after I'd already talked a couple times, to be honest. It had not been on my radar. I was actually looking mostly at developer conversations and because I was really keen on not working at a team level. I wanted to do something more ecosystem impacting. I know even in my later days at EG, I spent a lot of my time working on the Louvre agreement with CS, working with Valve on like revenue opportunities in the Dota space. So those were places, and also being a part of many of the LCS like owner meeting panels and things, and working on things from the owner side ecosystem wide. So I wasn't really keen on going team side, and I talked to a lot of my personal friends in the space about kind of what I was looking for and was interested in, and somebody sort of threw this to me as like who you should talk to is Darshan, like at the PA. And honestly, like I think he said it almost tongue in cheek at the time. He had the utmost respect for Darshan, but I think the PA in itself, a year ago was, held in the lowest regard possible at the time. I think there was very little faith in what it could be as an institution, how it functioned or how it could function, and whether or not there was, whether or not it was a suicidal move for my career to go take it on. So.
Yeah, and so what other players at that point? Because there, we'll talk about this in a minute, but there has been different people involved in kind of the leadership of it on the player side. What other players were involved in kind of the leadership at that point?
So it was really Darshan and Lorlo to some extent, and Core were sort of that initial board or initial executive committee was sort of the group who were kind of in that early conversation, but neither Core nor Lorlo were officially on at that point either. It was really Darshan, the idea that he wanted to reset this thing, wanted to start over, try and get it, try and figure it out and get it in a way that made sense to him and how he thought it could go forward. And so he was sort of vetting everybody kind of all at once and sort of with each other, and sort of an interesting, it was certainly the most unique interview process I had. I interviewed directly with him and had once, and then had a couple follow-up kind of interview conversations. But then, what Darshan did, and I think was really quite smart, was, he had people he was looking at for the board as well, as well as the exec early on, right? And he was saying, well, I'm not sure if I think you're right for the position. I think they're right for the board, but I'm not sure. Let's have you basically interview each other, like have a conversation, see, where you align, and then I'll get feedback from each of you. And that was sort of this collaborative process, which really, I think, established a really strong initial, board for us and myself in terms of relationships, because we all came in at the same time, having had really clear-eyed conversations about what we saw as the potential for this, what were our priorities, what do we think we could bring to the table. So in the end, we had some direct feedback that changed some of the people. Some folks who I had conversations with didn't end up on the board because we didn't think that it made sense, or there might be a conflict of interest or something else. So there was, I think, a really quality vetting process all around, and I think Darshan wanted to make sure that, even though at the time it was really as bare bones as possible, it was really him in a reboot, that there were a lot of voices and people who he trusted in the space to vet myself and to vet the other people.
Can you share a little bit more about that board? Like how big it is, what kinds of people are on it?
Yeah, so we have a 5-member board. The goal is really to have representation from kind of a variety of stakeholder spaces within esports that could help help support players. So we have Ryan Fairchild, who is one of the top player side lawyers in the space, is an invaluable member because there are so few player side lawyers at all, if any, sort of like full-time people. So having him and his insights is really important. Lauren Gaba Flanagan, who was at Theorycraft, which got acquired by One Team Partners. She worked at CAA and comes from the player representation side, historically, and like player brand and player voice as kind of her main callings. Brian Tran, who has really been all around. He did recruiting both at Riot and at Activision Blizzard, worked in operations at CLG, and now most recently post his board has joined with Jason Dockton, one of our other board members, at Rise Above the Disorder, which is a mental health nonprofit that works in gaming to ensure mental health services for people in the gaming space, especially if they can't afford those services. So Brian brought a lot of the a lot of developer knowledge and team side knowledge, as well as myself team side knowledge, and Jason brought the mental health and wellness aspect of this, and then of course Steven or Snoopy would be the last member. He probably is the one who goes without need of any sort of description, but everybody knows him. He is our rock from perspective of both the history of this work. He's someone who started on like player advocacy very early on as a player, but now also with Pipeline GG does a lot of work on player brand building and building stream and stream community, which is something that we do care a lot about for our players. Is how not do we just have perspective of former players on our board, but how do we engage with improving players' opportunities, not just today, but tomorrow and in the future. What do we do for players' wellness, outside of just negotiating better terms for them? How do we improve their ability to build their brand, which might build another better contract for them, or might give them an opportunity for a post career, or post playing career, right? So I think that's sort of where his angle comes. So that group together really just covers sort of the gambit of where we where we need insights. If I ever have a question or we ever have an area, there's always somebody on our board who we can lean on to either have the context or have a contact or have the knowledge themselves about how we can approach a situation. And I think it's been invaluable so far.
Cool. And for those who aren't too aware of kind of what a board might do in general or what they might do in this context, what kind of investment would this group of people make into the Players Association? Do they have an approximate number of hours per month that they'll invest for answering player questions, excuse me, offering like training and things like that, and then they get some like compensation in return, or what's the setup kind of like there?
Yeah, our board's entirely volunteer based, so
Okay.
there's no compensation side today as a nonprofit. I think there's a great benefit because we're dealing with some of the we've dealt in our short time together with some major issues in the space, whether it be how to like deal with the TSM investigation, working on Champions Queue, working on a variety of player legal legal negotiations, to new projects and initiatives we're going to be launching that'll help improve player well-being in ways that have yet to be possible in the esports space. So I think there's a lot there that's of benefit, but in terms of expectations, I have been on a board before, and I am very keen about respecting the fact that, hey, these people are giving us their time for free. So I do my best to to make anything we do really meaningful for them, but also as limited of an ask as possible. Everyone has sort of their own niche, which is really great because I'm rarely having to go to the same person over and over again and rely on them. I can, depending on the project, I may be taking a call once every couple of weeks with somebody on the team, along with our regular monthly board meeting. And then we have a group conversation where if there's something that comes up during the month in between our meetings that needs to be addressed, I can, quickly drop it in. We can have a quick text conversation about it as a group, and all in parallel be doing the same thing with our executive committee and be able to, Darshan and I are both the crossovers of those two groups and be able to see like, okay, here's where players are at. Here's where sort of our advisors are at. Let's, are we on the same page? Is there a disconnect? How do we, bring that together, bridge that? Sometimes, executive committee or players may ask specifically for feedback from board members or board opinions on things. So that tends to be where their biggest impact is. I'd say everybody's sort of involved in a project or a couple projects that we're working on tangentially and helping advise, and then being a part of those, kind of regular conversations that we have.
Cool. So speaking of the executive committee then, which is kind of the player side leadership of this, you guys did refresh that group of people back in January. And so now it involves Darshan as the president still. He's still Mr. President, which people love to throw up on Twitter. Core JJ is the treasurer, and then you have 3 vice presidents, which is Bjergsen, Revenge, and Vulcan. What's it been like working with kind of this new group? And I think a few of those are, or maybe just a couple of those are kind of new to this level of leadership in the organization.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a great group to work with. Over the last, when I came onto the job, I think probably the most important thing to remember is, the things that were said most commonly when we announced the reboot and in the months following were, well, like players don't care, like they just don't care, and they're too lazy to do anything, right? Like those were like the refrains I was fighting against. And it was, people said that to my face when I was thinking about taking the job. They're like, why would you take this job? Like the players don't care. And like you're going to get sunk because of it.
Well, and that goes back to when it was first established, right? Because something we haven't really talked about, like Riot, like the LCS itself established this kind of on the players' behalf in the first place, right?
Right.
And so it wasn't really a player-led creation.
For sure. It definitely had, players had wanted to find a way to organize, and there have been players involved in that, but Riot, as a part of franchising and, frankly, and, giving a lot of power to teams.
You should
right?
do this. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I think, I was not there at that time, but I think that there was clearly a sense of like, we are giving an unprecedented amount of power to teams in esports for the first time in a closed ecosystem that gives enormous power to teams to do whatever they, to be able to control, well, it doesn't matter. Like I'm one of, there's only 50 slots. So like 50 jobs, so if you want one, you got to come to us. You can't go to another team and just build it up, right? It's an enormous amount of power, and I think Riot understood that they needed to give voice to players in a more significant way and did it the best way that they could. And I think there were that there were some obvious like shortcomings in that, but we found our way kind of post that. And I think again the biggest part of it was coming into this reboot knowing that players and just as general employees, like workers in any business, do care about their conditions. They do care about their livelihoods. They do care about their futures, and they're busy people who have jobs that take up well over 40 hours a week. A professional esports job is something that looks much closer to 100 hours a week of commitment. They're incredibly busy. They're under high stress competitive environment against one another. So collectivizing is a real challenge, and finding the time and the capacity. My experience with players for years is something that I think came in really handy in my early days, and understanding how to meet a player where they were at, how to, a first goal before we got to a new board or new executive committee was just getting 10 reps, 1 rep from every team who we could rely on to simply, I had a doc built out. It was just, all we need to do is be able to tell you something that you can then trust, that I can trust you will tell the other 9 players. And
send the information home with the student in their backpack and know their parents are going to see it.
Yeah, but it's that's not that easy of a thing, especially when you don't know people specifically. When you're a very busy person, it's hard to ask somebody, and they don't know how much, am I telling them something every day they have to tell, right? Like, there's a lot of unknowns there for people that you have to kind of demystify, and finding one of each team who had cachet with the team and who was willing and eager to do it, and then building that was a big part of our first 6-7 months, and that's what's led to a strong executive committee, because like Vulcan was not one of our player reps. He was on C9 where we had Darshan already, but he was somebody who I constantly heard whenever we asked feedback for people, or asked feedback for folks there. We'd always hear, oh, well, Vulcan thought this as well. Vulcan thought that. And so I said, oh, well, can I just talk to him directly? And that's kind of how a lot of this built in the first few months, right? Was, we found people initially at each team, and then Revenge was one of our reps, and somebody who was really thoughtful and who always had, when I asked something or shared something, he always had a thought, or he always brought really good information back. So he was a really natural candidate, especially as we were like, okay, we want to have somebody who represents, like the younger generation or like newer generation of LCS talent as well, to try and have some perspective on the executive committee. And so that's kind of how we built that out. Even Bjergsen is a great example. When we were first starting about figuring out what would eventually become Champions Queue, I had been told that Soren was someone who had been really involved in the in-houses previously and had been trying to make it work. And so we had a lot of conversations when he was not a player, just about, what this could look like, what needed to happen. And he was really active and involved. So when he decided to become a player again, I was pestering him every day for like 2 weeks. So I was like, hey, so I hear you might be playing again. We could use this, we could use somebody on this exec committee. So, that's how it grew out of, which, when you're first starting, it was a lot of picking it out of a hat and trusting Darshan to find someone for us. And now we've really grown to a place where the players are so much more involved. We have so much more going on day to day that it's so easy to see where your leaders are, where your people are who are passionate and are really involved and really elevate them. And now we've done that in 3 ways now. We have not only our executive committee, but we also have our new player reps, a new generation of reps who will be our future leaders and who are our current leaders. And then we also have the council for the Champions Queue now, which is, 5 players. I think across that we have, probably like 16, 17 different players who are participating and representing players. And so, again, we started 8 months ago with just Darshan, and now we have, almost, a fifth of all the players really who are like actively, serving in some sort of like collective role. That's something I'm really proud of.
Cool. Yeah. To what extent do you think maybe achieving some things or accomplishing some projects has led to players being more interested or buying in more? Are there any kind of big wins you think you guys have had that have helped to change that attitude?
Yeah, I think I think someone has since referred to it as the Ted Lasso approach, which is just like trying to listen to any small problem somebody might have and trying to address, even the little things like the gaffer like fixes and things. I think that's always my approach when I've worked with players is try and listen and try and be responsive, because a lot of like issues or concerns are really easily answered if you're just attentive. That was how we built some initial trust out of the gate. I think the going and meeting with each of the teams individually during the summer when we had just before Delta hit, when we had kind of that last real like drop in COVID, was so important and impactful. Being able to see every player, talk face to face, hear concerns. I think it gave us a lot more ability to work. We also did a big survey, gathered a lot of information. That was where we gathered, the vaccination information about players and other things, but just a whole host of information about representation, about conditions on teams and things like that. And we were able to do a lot of follow-up, when we had people who wrote in issues or concerns, I had all their Discords. And so I could follow up and say, hey, like, can we talk about this? And so I think that built a lot of trust and set us up well for the off season when we started repopulating the player contract database, which had sort of really fallen in terms of the number of players actively putting in contracts. And I had heard from players who were like, well, I would, but if I'm the only one doing it, like, it's not good for me. If I'm the only person in my role or, in my level that's doing it, like, how is this servicing? And I had to build a lot of trust quickly to be able to get to a place where I could tell a player like, hey, if you submit, I'm going to make sure that you're not the only one in there and that there's going to be a majority. And we got a majority of players from all roles, which I think is, and LCS and Academy, which was a big accomplishment because, a lot of players aren't coming up as free agents, so they don't have motivation to participate or, don't really need to be submitting. So, that was something that was a big growth point. I think a lot of players felt the impact of being able to go into the database and actually see, a significant number of contracts and terms. And, I think those things really built faith. And of course, Champions Queue being the biggest one, only now delivered, but, we've been promising like it's going to happen. We're going to, like, we knew we had great conditions that Riot was really agreeing to, to really like show up in the way that we thought we needed to be successful. And we kept telling players like it's getting delayed, but it's getting delayed for the right reason, because they're wanting to make sure that it launches with this or that or with this other thing. And players were patient, and now that it's delivered, I think there's even more confidence and energy.
Yeah, and I'd love to talk a bit more about Champions Queue in a minute, but to go back to the idea of the contract database you're mentioning, for people, I think probably most people aren't aware of this initiative, and so to summarize that a bit, in October you guys tweeted out. I'll just read out what the tweet was. It says, "Knowledge is power. As Worlds begins, the LCSPA has sent out the 4th edition of the LCS contract database to LCS players who shared their own contract. Financial transparency improves the bargaining power of every employee. Get informed before you sign on the dotted line." So a call to the players, basically, to share this. So this is not the global contracts database Riot releases that says, hey, these players are signed to this team and here's their contract end date with very minimal information. To my understanding, this is a place where the players share to the Players Association, here's what I'm getting paid, here's my bonus structure, all those kinds of things. And then whoever is submitted to that, the players all get to see each other's information. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that is accurate. And it's based off a really important principle in American employment law, which is something that anyone listening on this podcast should be aware of, which is that you have a right to tell another employee your contract information. Your company might tell you you can't tell anybody or you can't tell this or that, but you have a right to tell other employees what you're making. You have a right to tell anyone who would advocate for you, a lawyer or a rep at a PA or something like that, your information to try and improve your bargaining situation. So those are those are rights, and that's what the contract database is founded on. And yeah, it's it was something founded by I guess my predecessor, who again also I don't think is super well publicized, but he continues to be a really involved advocate and confidant for us behind the scenes, and does a lot of work with me in particular. So I'm not a lawyer, he is a huge wealth of experience, so he's been really generous with his time as well, even though he's not a board member or anything of that nature. But he started that with that legal grounding, and it's been a huge game changer. We've seen player conditions, especially salaries, really rise because of it, and it continues to be a place where players can go and check to see if they're being told the truth or if they're being led astray about what the actual market is for them.
Have you had any pushback from the team owners or from the league itself about the initiative? I can imagine they might be kind of unhappy about it because it gives the players a little bit more information, a little bit more power.
I mean, my job's not to make team owners or the league happy. My job is to advocate for players' well-being and their legal rights. And I honestly, it's not a conversation with teams or with Riot about whether or not the database makes them happy. I mean, we never talked about it in that way because they know that a player has a legal right to do this, and we know it, and the players do it. And if I would be, I would be, incensed if there were teams that were, actively trying to prevent players from participating in the database or anything of that nature. I mean, that would just be unlawful. So, it's not something that's done elsewhere in esports, but we're hopeful that our example will be something that other players and other games will be able to, to learn from and take to heart, because it's something they should be taking advantage of.
Yeah, it's just interesting to think about, the natural tension that exists sometimes between the players and the teams, employer, employee. There's always a little bit of tension around things like you are negotiating over things. Teams want what's best for them. The players want what's best for themselves, and that doesn't always align, although in a lot of other ways it does align, right? You want to join a team, you want to win together. What's good for the team in those ways is often good for the player and vice versa. What are some of the ways that you guys help players to understand this tension and how to deal with it, not only with contract negotiations, but with certain other things, maybe streaming rights or use of their likeness, or I don't know, whatever else it might be?
Yeah, I think when it comes to that tension between teams and players, I'm intimately have an understanding of it because I was on the team side for a long time, and as someone on the team side who is very sympathetic to players and player rights and player opportunity, it's incredibly hard to be in a position where that most of your players don't have representation of any kind and aren't going to go seek it, and oftentimes they are trusting in you, like their manager, to or person that brought them to the team to be an advocate for them, and it's a really messy situation. I've talked with many other people in those positions still today who feel that, and they're like they want to do right by players, but they also have a fiduciary responsibility to their team to to be the best advocate for the organization, and it's a really frankly messed up situation that exists in esports that you don't really see significantly in other spaces. But I think it has to do with a lot of young people coming into a space and being recruited, and oftentimes your manager ends up being a bit like your life coach and can be like your work mom or your work dad, right? Like they're helping make sure you get fed, they're making sure you have housing, right? Often these are things we take for granted as being like team side services in esports, which we would say in traditional sports is an agent's job or an agent's role, right? Someone who's a direct advocate for the player. So what we've done is both, as we talk with amateurs in our first amateur sessions, really trying to educate them on that anyone you're working with on the team side has a responsibility to be a team first advocate, and their best interest is not your best interest. Encouraging them to get representation, encouraging players to communicate more about who has what representation and what quality representation that has been. I think has been a big early advocacy point for us is, not all representation is created equal, but you should get someone. And then our own role within that is, yes, being, we are the complaint box for, for players. And it's a really important thing because players haven't had that historically. And there's a lot of trust issues. I think the TSM investigation is a really clear one here, where it's obvious that there were issues with the way TSM management has operated for many years, like all the way to the top, as has been reported. And but there hasn't been anyone coming forward. And the reason why people haven't come forward is not because there wasn't something going on that was wrong or felt bad or inappropriate in the workplace. It was because there wasn't a sense of safety for where they could come with that information, whether it be to their employer, where again there might not be trust with the employer itself, and what their motives might be in getting that information, or to the developer, where there's a checkered history or a financial relationship with the team as well. These are not judgments against either of those groups, but it's factual things about how a workplace works, right? It is very hard if you don't have representation in some way to be able to know that I can go somewhere anonymously and safely to talk about an issue. So for us, just being able to say, hey, if you have any issue as a player, you can come tell us, and we will never take that information anywhere without, like, with your name or anyone's name, unless you give us permission. We have a really clear and strict policy about how that works. So if players come to us, we always ask, what do you want us to do with this information first? And then second, how do you want us to present it? Do you want us to share your name? Do you want us to say anonymous? And we talk to them about, how that could work in different ways, and coach them through what they want to be their outcome. And I think that's such an important part of what a PA can do. It's a very behind the scenes part of the job 99% of the time, but we've been able, in the amateur space, to do this, where we had players come forward saying, hey, I'm not getting paid, stuff like the Solifide situation. And we were able to take them anonymously to Riot, talk to our partners at Riot, who we meet with regularly, and say, hey, we have concerns here about a situation that exists. Can you guys use some soft power to try and lean on teams to make sure that they're doing right by players? And we were able to resolve those situations quietly and behind the scenes before they ever became, major public issues, because players had enough trust to be able to come to us believing that they weren't going to be harmed by speaking up about something. It's really hard in a workplace to speak up about things going wrong. You're afraid to lose your job. You're afraid to get labeled, a bad influence, or, some other kind of thing that, teams and employers often do with workers when they, when they're, advocating for their best interests and their well-being.
Yeah, and often it can feel like the the organization or the company has more power than the individual. And so even if you have, unless you get a lot of backup and a lot of support, you're going to feel like, hey, I can complain about this, but then the CEO is going to come out and say I'm wrong, and that's it. And like, now I just look bad. So yeah, I can imagine how big of a struggle that can be. You mentioned a little bit on the player representation side, and I'm curious about that. In the past, the LCSPA has been very vocal about fighting against, unethical contracts or clauses in contracts. Obviously, the perk situation between G2 and Cloud9, you guys had a strong statement about that and about, the parts of that you consider unethical. And you've also been, as we've heard today, very vocal about players' rights to have agents, lawyers representing them, things like that. As you said, though, not all player representation is created equal. And, especially as an insider, you hear stories now and then about certain player representatives maybe not being the most ethical themselves on the player representation side. How do you handle situations like that, where it is, in theory, in the best interest of the player to have somebody representing them, but maybe something is happening that isn't quite, above board?
Yeah, well, I think that there's there very much is two sides to this, and being on the PA side, we have sort of interesting place in perspective, especially my history of being on the team side as well, which I am fully aware of, right? So I have a relationship with a lot of team people, and sometimes folks on the team side will come to me and be like, "Hey, agent so and so is kind of like acting unethically," and I'm like, "Okay, well, tell me what they did." And I'm like, "Well, they're telling me that they're gonna not sign a contract, like they're gonna hold out their player and like get a better deal, or they're bidding us against some other team." And I'm like, "That sounds like they're doing their job, right?"
Yeah, that's not
So
unethical.
I would say, and I think that's a problem out of the gate, because I think there is a lot of like soft conversation about agents and representation who are doing a bad job or being unethical without actually putting forth any true like statements about why that is unethical, why is it bad for them to be advocating for their player in the best way they see fit, or the way that them and the player have agreed upon. And we do a lot of checking. When we hear stuff, we take it seriously, and we'll talk to the player and we'll say, "Hey, are you comfortable with the representation? Are you happy with the strategy you're using?" And we'll make sure that there's some understanding there. And as long as the player is happy with the representation, that is what means the most to us from that perspective. Now, we do believe that representation is something that needs to be taking on more. We want to see player representation doing more outside of contract season. We want to see and we see that in some representatives and not necessarily all, but we want to see them doing more to ensure protections over player individual name, image, likeness. Like, those rights are important, and they need to be doing more to help create opportunities for those players within those rights and really find monetization avenues for players outside of just their player contract. They need to be doing more throughout the year to ensure that a player feels comfortable in their housing situation or in their taxes, or the things that we take for granted in traditional sports as agent responsibilities have not been fulfilled historically across the board in esports. And we talk with agents regularly across the board about what they're doing, how they can service. And I think my confidence is that we're seeing better and better representation every year. There are many groups out there who are working hard to try and try and change how people perceive what agents can be and what lawyers can be in the space. And that's where we want to be supportive, because again, we are an association, our job is not to be individual player contract negotiators and advocates in that way, right? We're not agents or lawyers in that way. We don't provide specific advice on those things. So the best thing that we can do is really help raise the level and trust in representation, which again also includes referrals, making sure players are communicating and talking to each other about, did I have a good experience, have a bad experience? Because word of mouth and reputation is the thing that those folks rely on. And if players are really doing a good job of communicating and sending business to or away from representation that's not doing a good job, then that's going to help to improve the space and weed out anybody who is a bad actor. But by and large, I would say a lot of that soft conversation about unethical agents feels like sour grapes from teams who are seeing real pushback and real power from people who know what people's value is now.
Let's move on to something a little more fun.
I was having
Champions
a good time.
Queue. Champions Queue has obviously been very exciting. It's been a big project, a long time coming, and there's a lot of work on different sides of this, from the Riot side and from the player side. Now that we're a few weeks in, how well do you think it's been kind of living up to the hopes that you guys had for it?
Well, I had a lot of stress about the first few weeks, as anyone at Riot could understand. As probably my number one drumbeat throughout this entire process, as we've pushed for this, is there were conversations about launching something in September or October at one point in time, and the thing I said more than anything was, we get one chance at this, we have to get it right. Because if you launch it and people don't show up, or they don't show up on day 2, or they don't show up on day 3, it's dead and it's never coming back, and we just wasted however many months doing it, and we're never going to have the credibility to do it again. So that was the thing that mattered most to me, was getting it right. And we delayed the project several times, I think I mentioned earlier, because there was something that was missing that we felt was necessary. Now, there's still a lot to improve on in the product, and things we're learning every day in terms of bugs or like growing pain pieces. I think switching over the TR to the new patch has been a troubling one that's slowing things down right now that they're working on fixing. So it's not perfect, but players love it, and that's what we care about. Like, it has gotten all the reception that we thought it could or should get, in terms of it fills exactly what was needed. We talked to all of our players about what they wanted, what they needed, what was lacking for them, and it can be easy to say, well, you guys should just be unionizing and like collective bargaining. But like if your players are telling you that the thing they care most about is their solo queue experience and their fear that they can't train properly, then that's the thing you have to put first and address. And that's that's where we put our focus. And players have responded really strongly, and Riot, to their credit, listened to our feedback and took it really seriously. There were conversations early on about what the pricing should be, and they're like, well, we could send them all jackets like we did for making Challenger a few years ago. And I was like, we had we talked with players, because we actually had conversations with every player. And there were players who were like, yeah, I gave my jacket to my little sister. I was embarrassed to wear it, like immediately. And that wasn't the case for everyone. There was a player in that conversation who was wearing his jacket at that very time, who was like ashamed. He was like, I love this thing. But we got the feedback from players that said, hey, like, we need it needs to have a real stakes. Like, trinkets and things just don't speak to everyone. What speaks to everyone is money, because money says that this thing matters. Whether you actually care about getting money or not, it has always been like esports took a big leap when Dota announced the first international with $1 million prize pool, because money speaks, and that mattered. And Riot came with more money than we initially asked for, to be honest. And because we spent a lot of time going back and forth on what the structure would be, and they really came forward with an amazing offer, an amazing plan. Like financially, that spoke volumes. And we talked about the features it needed to have, and how it needed to be a true, like one-click solution. If you're going to have to do it through Discord, because we're doing it through, have to build it through a third party, since it's us and the LCS team, not necessarily us and like Riot as a larger entity. So it's not going through the gameplay team in terms of construction. If it's going to be a third-party solution, it can't work like the previous bots have, where you have to go make your own lobby and where you have to go track your own stats. Like, you need to be able to join a queue in the Discord, and it needs to be able to take you to, you need to be able to get straight into the game, and all the stats and all that need to be automated. And they delivered on all those things, and we slowed it down to make sure that those things were ready. There's more features we need: better matchmaking, cleaning up some of these bugs, faster turnover in the TR. We're still figuring out proper rating system, figuring out who should and shouldn't be in Challengers queue to begin with. There are things that are natural growing pains, but overall, incredibly happy with the product, and just my happiness is just a proxy for whatever players feel. If players have concerns, and I share those when we move those forward, but by and large, every player who says a concern is like, and I'm going to play another 6 hours tonight because I love it, and I feel so invigorated about playing League of Legends. I feel like I'm getting better. I feel like these games are like inspiring me. So I'm like drinking up every video and every post I can see about a player like having a good time, and at the same time looking for the feedback, finding ways to get it better, and keep making it better, because we don't want to fall into a place where we get complacent and the thing falls off. It's it's clearly too valuable to let fail at this point. We have to keep putting in as much effort as is necessary to make it succeed.
So, to be completely clear on this, there's about a 50,000-ish total prize pool for spring and for summer each, right? And then a little bit more than that for kind of the off season, or what they're calling the preseason one. And that's entirely coming from the Riot side?
Entirely from Riot. They put it all up. So again, 100% props to them, to Greeley, to Zach, to everybody who worked on it. There were plenty of other people behind the scenes who weren't my day-to-day folks, but they delivered. It's $400,000 across the entire year. I think there's the 3-month seasons, right? Or the splits, and then there's individual monthly pricing as well. So I think each individual month has its own pricing that I think is somewhere in the realm of like $20,000. So
I see,
and then the 3-month cycle. So we wanted to make sure there was value in both playing in a month. If you were someone like Double Lift who kind of started in late, maybe you're not super viable to get pricing for this month, but you could still be competitive for the 3-month split, or immediately viable for the next month. So we wanted to have that sense of both immediate, like short-term victories that people can be fighting for every month, and also have a cadence of kind of these build-up, kind of crescendo moments across the season.
Cool. Yeah, I was trying to scroll through the official website and get a sense of the actual prize pool numbers here, and it's a little bit hard to tell it, but so that helps to clarify it a little bit, and maybe they'll tweak the website presentation a little bit more. But as long as the players know roughly how it's going to work, then I'm sure it's all good.
Yes.
Did you expect to see such a high amount of kind of community interest and support Things like, Winter's Award, who's a Twitch moderator for just about every channel that exists, tracking dozens of Twitch streams and tweeting out where to watch the games. Entire websites being built to kind of surface the data and package it a little bit differently so people can kind of see what their favorite players are doing. All that kind of stuff what has that response kind of been like compared to what you might have thought would happen?
It's been really exciting. It's really, I've done a lot of projects. I'm getting long in the tooth, got a few gray hairs. Not everyone comes out with a bunch of fanfare, so you definitely try and take the time to enjoy when things are really connect and really feel good. So it's been great from that perspective. And at the same time, it was something we believed was going to happen. We believed. I had the rule like Field of Dreams like mentality. Like if you build it, they will come. Because part of our initial pitch to Riot was like, if we know from other games that when these sorts of leagues are constructed with proper support and backing, that it is just clearly the best solution, that players enjoy it the most. And the biggest problems tend to be that most in-house league style systems are created by players and lack sort of an infrastructure and ongoing support that can make them successful. It's one of the reasons why FPL is so successful in CS, because there's a third party who is supporting the players who, again, are full-time players and don't have the time to really operationalize a project like that long term. And yeah, we knew it was going to be a hit and be successful if it came together. We knew that there's nothing more fun than listening to players like talk on comms, and like those make matches so much more interesting for fans. We know that it makes games more interesting for players. We know that like those were things that that just made sense. And just if you look across any esport that's ever done this stuff, when it happens and when it's successful, it's always one of the most thriving periods for streaming and for watching. And we hope it really helps to reinvigorate more interest in the LCS as well. Not only will you think the caliber of play increase, but there's an easier chance to like learn about player personalities because you are hearing them day to day. And yeah, we just we're excited about it.
Yeah, cool. I'm curious from the LCSPA side, have you ever viewed Champions Queue as a way to potentially provide another avenue for scouting for teams, for players, especially once you guys in the future, in theory, are able to open up membership to more like top members of solo queue or whatever it is, to kind of help those players get discovered and earn their way into the ecosystem, or is that just an angle that you guys haven't really worried about?
Yeah, it does matter to us. We care a lot, not only about our current membership, but about the future membership of our league and ensuring the health of the league. A good steward as an association is understanding that your association is only as good as the existence of it, right? So we need a healthy league long term to be in the best interest of all players. And for us, a big part of that is finding and developing talent, inspiring the next generation to compete to become that talent, making them feel like they have a pathway. I've seen in other games where they lose a generation of talent because the top can feel so like gate kept and closed off that they don't really know how to break into the scene. And yeah, you end up with a lot of kind of the same revolving door of players in different games. So I think for us, it's incredibly important that Champions Queue be more in the long term than just a training ground for existing pros or semi-pro players. I think I sort of balk at the amateur term. Many of those players are on contracts being paid money, so they're not. Amateurism is sort of a fleeting term in general, I would say, in sports. So I'll call it semi-professional. But those spaces, are currently what we're cordoned off on, competitive people. But so many of the top players came straight from solo queue at some point in time, and they moved from challenger straight into an academy team or straight into the LCS in some instances. So for us, we want to see a world where we can find a middle ground that allows for more top challenger players to participate, even if they're not on amateur teams. We know that there's a lot of learnings to be done about how Champions Queue affects the solo queue environment at the top and how we can do that. But, I think our dream long-term would be able to see the first ever integration of a Champions Queue style system or an FPL style system into the main client, into that. That would be our dream. We know that's a long way off and not a demand today, but I think that's the future that we think would be best for all of really any esport or any game, honestly. Be to have your top of your ladder be a really like exclusive invite only space where people are competing for real dollars, because like folks have said, like rank 1 and challenger, doesn't mean as much as, like it feels like you get there and then you're like, okay, I'm here. What next?
Yeah.
You either get picked up by a pro team or you learn on something else. And Champions 2 provides a consistent and persistent way to, to compete and to win and to earn. And we think that's just like really powerful tool. So the more we can expand it, the better in the long term.
Yeah, you've mentioned how the ability to, on streams, listen in on team comms and things like that is a way to give fans more exposure to the player personalities and the fun of it, especially because they do have a lot more fun in these games than they would in an actual pro game. They're joking around a lot, maybe teasing each other. And we've also seen players expressing some of that personality a lot, I think especially recently on social media with kind of trash talk or banter or even a little bit getting into flame wars now and then. And there has been a bit of that. And sometimes it's all in good fun. Sometimes it seems like it might be towing the line a little bit. What kind of guidance do you guys provide to players about, where to go with that, with being public on social media, but, managing kind of, what makes you look good and shows your personality versus what is maybe kind of harmful to the other members and you're all in this together kind of thing?
Yeah, I play a lot of basketball. I'm a very competitive person. I love sports and I love competing and I love talk. Like talking trash is like one of the most fun things I do on a daily basis. Whenever I go play basketball, it is, my dream to be able to just like zing somebody, talk somebody into the ground, but in a fun way, like not disparaging them, not, being disrespectful, but just, like letting it fly and being competitive. And I think that's something that we preach to players consistently is saying, your brand is important for your future. You have a lot of players who come in who say they just want to play. If they want to do that, that's fine. But you will always have more opportunity if you are more popular, if you have defined yourself in the space in some way. Like these are realities. They're not things that we are, that we're making up anyway. We're being candid with players, and we think that's important to say, hey, like if I was on the team side. We have other people who are on the team side. If you're in a room and you have 2 players who are of equal competitive stature, it's a coin flip for who you think will win their matchup or like win the game. If one player has 1 million followers on Twitter and one player has 1,000 followers on Twitter, guess what? The 1 million follower player is going to have a significant advantage getting on the team. That's a reality. It's a reality in any sport. There are players who in the NFL or in the NBA who bring a lot of value outside of just being a competitive player, whether it be a locker room presence or being a big like influential person. Like those things can get you more opportunity, right? Like Dirk's last season on the Mavericks was not because he was good enough to play in the NBA anymore. The guy could barely walk, but he was a legend and had built himself in a reputation in a way that the team wanted to have him around and wanted to give him another year. Many other players who had played that many years did not get such a send off and make so much money in their last year because they hadn't achieved these things both successfully, but also in terms of becoming a personality in some way. So we look at that in the same way here. Like a player needs to be mindful of how they build their brand, and be understanding about how to be, how to enjoy being your biggest and best self if you're comfortable being that in a public space, how to do it in a way that can, build you fandom, but not for the wrong reasons,
Yeah.
How to be controversial without being offensive is something that I've talked with many players about in the past. Like you can say something that will, that will inspire like people to adore you and hate you without saying something that offends anyone. Like it is, it is possible. Like just being cocky, just being like really confident is a way to like instantly win you a lot of fans and a lot of haters. And if, if you're a person who enjoys that and who doesn't get affected by, the social media reactions or things or the trolls out there, then that can be a powerful tool for you in building your brand. Jojo, obviously, like he, is the biggest example of this. And
This is your goat.
yeah. And like, I love when a player like feels confident in going out and being that way in public. And I think he approached it in a way that was very fun. Like everybody enjoyed lock-in that much more because they were like, oh, when we want to see, like Bjergsen versus Jojo, like that's going to be so exciting. Right. And so, and I think the players involved had a good time with it and like didn't feel anything about it. I think, I've talked to Soren, like, I think he thought it was like, fun that the kid had confidence and like, that's the way to approach it. Right. And so that's what we take to players is, be your best selves, really embrace the part of entertainment that you are, like this is your competitor, and have fun with it, and be ready to let it fly, and do it in a way that doesn't need to offend anyone. You don't need to say something disrespectful or disparaging to talk trash. In fact, it's boring and pretty like weak when you do. Like it's uninteresting. Like you can be more clever than that. So
yeah. So what's the future briefly? What are the next kind of big projects or challenges that you're expecting now to take on?
we have a big one coming up in the near future here. So maybe the timing of this podcast is a little preemptive of that, as I can't share full details. But for us, the biggest priorities are how do we, like, now that we've, I think, done, especially competitively, the best thing that we can do for our players, helping put Champions Queue in place, working to make sure that it's continually improving. The look then can turn more inwards to, we've shown our players that we can be a value to them. How do we create more value? How do we take the next step to create more value for them? How do we ensure that the PA can be a long-standing entity? I think those are things that we're looking to, and how we can move forward. Because again, when I came on, there was money from Riot previously, but it was the end of the line for funding, and I came on very explicitly saying I don't want to come on if Riot's going to give more money to the PA, because I don't want to want to be in a place where there's a question about who we serve. And so we have to now take these successes, take these pieces of proof that players can both do work collectively and have big achievements for themselves, and turn that into an ability for us to be to be able to continue and go and exist long term. So we're exploring that with the players right now, and should have something coming soon, which we think will be a big opportunity for everyone. And we have I think the tenor of a lot of the rest of the year for us, aside from fighting the fires that come up that we can't see today, will be how do we improve players' day-to-day lives? How are we giving them better opportunities? We've got some really exciting partners coming, and that's going to be what it's all about, and making sure that the PA is able to continue to do good work for players for years to come.
Cool. Well, we'll look forward to hearing whatever that is, and seeing what you guys work on. And I think people who are interested in this space should definitely follow you and the Players Association on Twitter. So I'll make sure links for that are in the show notes for this. And beyond that, what is there a certain way for people to follow you outside of just like following stuff on Twitter? Is there a place to kind of get central information about what you guys are doing and announcements and things?
We stay pretty lean. We keep it on Twitter for right now. We're probably going to launch a site sometime this year. No guarantees, but I have a very pragmatic view of the world, and my view is that we can achieve the things we need to do through Discord and Twitter right now, and we should prioritize the work that can be done before we spend time and resources on a fancy website that people won't click on very often. So keep tuned to Twitter. We'll keep trying to be more public, and if you guys ever have questions for us or issues, like I'm always checking and trying to pay attention to it and be more accountable. I think that's a place we've been looking to grow this year, as we've felt out our voice and where we can and should be more vocal when things happen. So hold us accountable. We'll keep trying to do better.
Great. Well, thank you for joining me today very much, Phil. And thank you to everyone for listening. You can support the TrueSight podcast at patreon.com/OraclesElixir. You can subscribe to the show at Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and anchor.fm/TrueSight. And make sure you check out the Oracle's Elixir Discord server to talk about League of Legends esports, data science, and a lot of other topics. Links for all those things will be in the show notes. This has been the TrueSight podcast, and I'm Tim Sevenhusen. Thanks for listening.